Hi, this is Wale Oluwade. In the part two, I'll be speaking today on I'm continuing on the teaching, the meaning, what is the meaning of education. In the part two, I had spoken about Moses and Paul and how these two men greatly influenced and are still influencing and impacting humanity generally. One man of them in particular, that is Moses, who lived at least 5,000 years back, is still impacting, influencing, and affecting the lives of almost 60% of the world's current population. Critically, I stated that God is waiting for the manifestation of his sons and daughters to give them political power, to give them dominion and rulership over this world. But the sons and daughters of God must be fully prepared and ready for divine visitations. The sons and daughters of God must develop, therefore, their minds. They must become highly informed and educated, to become useful maximally to God. Let me say this: modern man prides himself on being smart and super intelligent, but the reality of today's COVID-19 pandemic crisis has put paid to that silly assumption. Our case study today, however, under consideration, is Joseph. Who was Joseph? He was the second to the last of Jacob's 12 sons, the princes of Jacob, or the princes of God. Now, Joseph was a Jewish slave or immigrant because his brothers had sold him, he had become a slave in Egypt, a foreign nation. But Joseph, when he got to Egypt, refused to assume a victim mentality, but he was unbowed and undaunted. He wasn't bitter or resentful of his siblings. He was not resentful of his environment. He wasn't resentful of his siblings. He was not even resentful of their language and their culture. Rather, he embraced his present reality with great optimism and passion. He made himself useful. Joseph became diligent and studious. He became extremely diligent and studious. And by strategic thinking, he identified the most critical decision to make, and he made that decision. What was the decision that Joseph made? Joseph did something truly significant and life transforming. What was this critical strategic decision? Very simple. Joseph learned the language and culture of his new environment, meaning he adapted to change. Now, Joseph was living, before he got into Egypt, Joseph was living a comfortable life in his father's house, in his country, but by the curious hand of destiny or fate. And I choose to call this by the curveballs. These are, occasionally God or life or fate or destiny throws curveballs at us, and it is your reaction to these curveballs that determine, your next phase or next, position in life. Now, suddenly, overnight, as it were, Joseph's cushy life was radically transformed from being a favorite son of a wealthy father to becoming a slave in a foreign land. And you would expect Joseph at least to be bitter and resentful, of his siblings. At least he should be bitter, against, his dad, for giving birth and raising such sons, who would come up with such a dastardly scheme as to sell their own stepbrother. But Joseph didn't. But let me digress. Many of us currently are fighting and resisting the change that is engendered, by the current COVID-19 pandemic. I implore you, don't do it. Rather, adapt, rebrand, rethink, re-strategize, renew, and reinvent yourself and your business. Let's get back to Joseph. Now, Joseph wasn't racist or bigoted. Joseph didn't become biased. He didn't become, or he didn't become prejudicial. He was not prejudiced, against the Egyptians. Joseph didn't say, no, these people are infidels. I am not going to assimilate, their culture or language. Rather, Joseph settled in quickly and developed himself to become extremely intellectually versatile. And after a few years, the day came when Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had a dream that required interpretation. And in the entire nation of Egypt, only Joseph could interpret the dream. The rest, as it is commonly said, has become history. And this history, guess what, is even still being repeated here, as I speak. The history of Joseph's, decision and extraordinary accomplishment is still being repeated now. Now, imagine if Joseph had been unable to understand the Egyptian language. How could he seize the once in a lifetime opportunity, go on to shine like a billion stars before Pharaoh and his council, and ultimately arrive at his preordained destination? I mentioned the curveballs that life throws at us every so often, and the essence, the strategic, in the strategic perspective of God, the reason why God throws, these strange curveballs at us is not to put us down, it's not to destroy us, it is to elevate us. These curveballs were thrown, at the three, Hebrew boys when they were thrown into the fire. The curveball was thrown at Daniel when he was thrown into the fiery furnace. The curveball was thrown, at David when, a king, Saul, left his throne and began to pursue a 17-year-old boy all over in the caves and in the mountains. Of every one of these people that I mentioned, after the way they embraced these challenges and situations, or curveballs, determined, how they got, to their destination, as ordained by God or preordained by God. Let me say this while we're at it. The top 10 spoken languages in the world currently are English, the English language. The number of people that speak, the 10 most commonly spoken languages in the world. English, number one, 1.37 billion people. Mandarin, spoken by the Chinese people, 1.17 billion people. Hindi, that is the language spoken by the Indians and the rest of them, 615 million. Spanish language, 534 million. French language, 280 million. Russian language, 265 million. Bengali, 258 million. Portuguese, 199 million. Indonesian, 170 million. I'll just stop at this 10. There are several other languages that are being spoken all over the world. Now, like I said, I mentioned it because Joseph, a Hebrew, he was a Jew who spoke Hebrew language, but then he found himself in Egypt where the culture is different, the language is different. But then he settled in. He became studious. He applied himself and learned not just the language, but the culture of the Egyptian people. And then he went on to interpret the dream that the king dreamt. Now, if only the language or languages that you are proficient in are your local languages, then I'm truly, I'm sorry for you. Remember, this teaching is about becoming a person of great influence. I mean, being useful to God and to the world. Being useful to the world and to God. And remember, like I said about Moses, someone who has died at least 5,000 years, but still impacting at least 3.5 billion people on the earth currently. So, if you are going to be a person if you are going to influence the greatest number of people on this earth, you've got to have proficiency in more than your local language or languages. So, based on this, personally, I have committed, to learning and becoming proficient in Spanish and French languages in the next 2 years. And so help me God. And I'm not saying that I will learn. I'm saying I am already learning both languages. Anyway, let's go back to Joseph. Joseph was able to influence the course of human civilization radically, because at that time, Egypt was the greatest nation on earth. Now, by his spiritual gift, working in tandem with his great intellect. Did you hear that? Joseph, possessed spiritual gifts. He was a deeply spiritual man. But the Spirit of God in him was not working alone. The Spirit of God in Joseph was working together with his great mind, his great intellect. And that's why I keep saying, develop your mind. Become a person who is highly educated, highly informed. Now, Joseph supervised global economic management for over 20 years. Because though Joseph was highly spiritual, we know this because the gift of interpreting dreams isn't intellectual. The gift of interpreting the dream of Pharaoh was not an intellectual dream. And Joseph also feared God greatly. But being spiritual wasn't enough. He was equally a super intelligent individual. So he Joseph proceeded to give a brilliant strategic master plan on the economic management on the management of Egyptian economy in the next 7 years of plenty. And this was what got him the position of prime minister, second only to Pharaoh. It was the strategic master plan on economic management of the nation of Egypt that got Joseph the position of prime minister, a slave, a foreigner, becoming second in command only to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, because of his intellectual application. So I conclude, what are you doing with your mind? God is waiting for you to demonstrate readiness to lead. Not just your tribe, not just your ethnicity, but nations and kingdoms. Several scriptures of the Bible say it categorically. God wants us to reign. We were not redeemed, to be slaves. We're not redeemed to holding, to the short end of the stick in political management of this earth. We are redeemed to reign, to rule upon the affairs of the nations and the kingdoms of the world. If your mind isn't fully developed to its fullest potential, then you'll remain bigoted, racist, prejudiced, and intolerant of other people. God is waiting for you, let me say that again, to demonstrate readiness to lead not only your tribe and ethnicity, but nations and kingdoms. But if your mind isn't fully developed to its fullest potential, then you remain bigoted, racist, prejudiced, and intolerant. Look at Nigeria. In this small, tiny nation, because though we like to think Nigeria is so big, of a nation of 200 million people, Nigeria isn't that big, because there are so many other nations. India, 1.1 billion people. China, 1.5 billion people. The most populous nation on earth is China, 1.4 billion people. So Nigeria is way behind Indonesia, America, 330 million people. And I just told you, of the 10 major spoken languages in the world, no Nigerian language comes even in the top 10. So if you're living in Nigeria and all you think about is, I am from Biafra, I am from Yoruba land, I am from Fulani, I am Efik, I am Kanuri, I am Hausa, then you are bigoted, you are racist, you are parochial, and you are not going to be useful to God. God isn't looking for people like you. I have to say it in such a very brutal, fashion. You have to think outside of your comfort zone. You have to think way beyond, your immediate environment. God isn't looking for local champions. God is looking for global citizens, people of great minds, to give, the kingdoms of the world to rule and to dominate over. Guess what? Jesus' last instructions. What was Jesus' last commandment or instructions? This is what Jesus said. And all the Gospels attest to this. This is what Jesus said. The very last instruction Jesus gave to his disciples and to the rest of us. He said, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, of all nations, of all nations. Let me ask you, how influential and impactful would your discipleship be if you're operating at the level of a president or prime minister or a king, rather than being just an evangelist or a teacher or a Bible scholar? And that is why God wants to give us, the kingdoms of this world to rule over. I mentioned in the part 2 of Philosopher Kings, we are redeemed to be kings and priests. We are not redeemed to be going around, championing parochial, biased, bigoted, racist views and opinions. Don't be a local champion. Rather, choose to be a person of global influence. Now, as I round up, finally, what are some practical steps to developing your mind? And I will use myself as an example. Of course, there are so many people who have better, greater minds than myself. And I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying I have an awesome mind. I'm just using myself. I'm still learning. I'm a perpetual student. I'm always studying and learning. So what do I do to develop my mind? Number one, in addition to possessing top quality graduate and postgraduate degrees in banking, insurance, and risk management, I also have professional qualification as a chartered insurer and chartered insurance broker. Number two, from my teenage years, I have been reading at least 3 newspapers daily. Those days it was the Guardian newspaper, the Daily Times of blessed memory, and the Punch, or the Nigerian Tribune, Vanguard, and Concord newspaper. Name them. Number 3. Then I graduated from reading newspapers that other people's bought, my father or some of my friends' dad, to buying and voraciously reading Time International Magazine, Fortune Magazine, and Forbes. Guess what? I actually collected these magazines, these foreign magazines, Time, Fortune and Forbes. I collected them, and I have a library full of this collection of Time Magazine, International Magazine, Fortune and Forbes. Now, currently, I read at least between 5 and 7 newspapers daily, both local and foreign newspapers. The New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Daily Telegraph in the United Kingdom, The Guardian in the UK, Financial Times. I remember when I was studying in the UK, I used to go to class, with my Financial Times, and my classmates used to look at me like, where did this one come from? I mean, a foreigner reading Financial Times. Because I loved that journal. And then, of course, I got a lot of research, material, for the course I was studying. Now, locally also, I read this day newspaper, The Guardian, and a few others. Number 5, I watch foreign news organizations. I do mostly CNN and a bit of Al Jazeera. Guess what? I'll put a caveat on CNN. I don't believe everything they say on CNN, because at the end of the day, they're still trying to propagate American influence all over the world. But, highly informative, highly educative, news network, and it's 24 hours, breaking news and all of that. So I love CNN. Now, I read books on varied subjects and topics, politics, biographies, but especially technical reports, journals, research papers on different disciplines, topics, etc. I search out and read the reports of studies done by development agencies such as the World Bank, IMF, United Nations, European Community Bank, African Development Bank, the UNDP, etc. I watch lots of current affairs, programs on television. My favorite current affairs programs on TV, obviously would be CNN. So Fareed Zakaria, that's my number 1. The guy is highly intellectual, so I watch a lot of his interviews. Fareed Zakaria, Christian Amanpour, Anderson Cooper, Chris Cuomo, and Don Lemon on CNN, and of course I follow a few local TV interviewers, too. Number 9, I love, and watch sports, football, tennis, golf, athletics, boxing, etc. I was up watching, when Deontay Wilder, fought Tyson Fury, and I thought Tyson Fury had no chance in hell, of defeating Deontay Wilder. But then I was stunned, to see, Deontay Wilder got the beating of his life. Ruptured his eardrums and all of that, So, I follow, all these things. Now, number 10, I do lots of movies too. As they say, arts imitate life. So, and it's very true. I have learned a great deal from watching countless great movies. I've learned a lot from watching all kinds of movies, different genres of movies, action, romance, thrillers, drama, name it. I watch series. Some of the best series, movie series I've watched, The Homeland, because I love a lot of CIA, stuff. So Homeland, is very, very, I'm very interested in the Homeland series. I watched 24. That was very good too. So I watch a lot of movies because you learn a lot from movies. I watch documentaries 11 on History Channel. I watch the History Channel. I watch National Geographic Channel because I love to see animals in their natural habitat, the way they behave. Number 12. So these are just a few of how I have developed my mind over the years. Number 13, of course, I have a library of Christian books and collections, and all kinds of other instructional materials that can rank, with that of any reputable preacher anywhere in the world. My collection of Christian materials, books, DVDs, CDs, name it. My collection of books can rank with anybody's anywhere in the world. My collection of my consulting books, the books I use for my consulting business, can rank with those of anybody, also anywhere in the world. Now, as I conclude finally, between the formal and the informal educational methods, both of which I have experienced, I can confidently state that I have learned far much more than I could ever learn through the informal method of learning. I have learned much more, far much more, through the informal method of learning than I could have ever learned from the formal method of learning. So, if I were to advise any young man or woman, young men or women watching, I will advise you, have a good master's degree, and back this up with a professional, certification. Then commit yourself to a lifelong quest for learning through the informal methods. Why? You see, formal education gives you technical skills and structured learning. But the informal learning gives this, both they give you technical skills, the informal learning give you, the technical skills, they give you structured learning, and they give you critically wisdom. You don't get wisdom by learning in the university. They give you technical skills. You want to be an engineer, they train you to be an engineer. You want to become a medical doctor, they train you to become a medical doctor. And they give you structured environment. This is how to go about it. But then wisdom, how to apply everything you've learned in the real world. Because in the classroom is different from the real world. In a structured environment is different from the real world. So, develop your mind, read widely, possess a broad-based, multifaceted learning. Learn 1 or 2 foreign languages. To the young ones, I would urge you to learn Mandarin. Everybody who is younger than 30, I would encourage you to learn, at least, learn the Mandarin language. That is the Chinese language. Because the future, I see in the next 30, 40 years, the future would belong to the Chinese, no matter what America does. That's my own educated, hunch. I may be wrong, but that's what I think. So if you can do this, then when life throws you a curveball, you will be fully prepared for it. And I guarantee you, God himself will use you in due course. Now, till I come your way again, like I always say, subscribe to this YouTube channel, click on that bell button so that you get notifications when new videos are released. Drop me a line in the comment section so I could, we could rub minds together, and share these videos with your friends and your contacts. And like I always say, this is the season of COVID, so stay safe and stay blessed. Adios.